You're watching 13 on Your Side.
My name is Leadrian Roby, and it's pronounced Leadrian. It looks like Adrian, but it's Leadrian, and it's Leadriane. Last name is Roby, Roby, and I am the superintendent of Grand Rapids Public Schools.
All right, so today we're going to be talking a little bit about the plan that the Grand Rapids School Board of Education came up with yesterday regarding the restructuring or possible restructuring of GRPS. Can you talk a little bit briefly about that?
Sure. And so we went through a process over the last few years for a strategic plan, which included outcomes around what we wanted to see for our scholars and also what we wanted to see for our community. And one of the tenets of that strategic plan was to ensure that all schools are viable options across our district. Another tenet of the strategic plan included transparency, building a culture of collaboration with our stakeholders. And so those two are the framework for our facilities master plan. And so the facilities master plan has not been developed. We are just at the beginning stages of using those two tenets that I just spoke of, making sure that all schools are viable options, because that's an equity and an access piece, as well as ensuring that we are intentional about our stakeholder engagement. We have started to talk about what are our facilities, what is our current reality, what does that look like for the future, what are some opportunities to reinvest, revitalize, upgrade our school community so that every child has the experience of having a rigorous, relevant education and can be proud of the schools that are in their community.
And so part of that plan could be a possible restructuring where you're going to be closing some facilities and moving staff around to basically have facilities that are more occupied, essentially, because from what I understand,
Yes.
is a lot of your facilities are around 50% occupation right now as far as student enrollment.
That's not quite accurate.
Okay.
We have 44 buildings, and in some of those buildings, because some of those buildings are filled to capacity, but within some of those buildings, there is around a 50% utilization. And so when you look at the district as a whole, then you could say, oh yeah, a lot of our buildings are not being fully utilized. And so it's about how do we reinvest in our school district, in our school community, and how do we reinvest our resources? So it's not about looking at supporting buildings, it's about how do we support our scholars, how do we support our staff in meaningful ways so that people can have fully operationalized, utilized buildings so that they get the full resources and supports that they deserve. And they don't have to work as hard. And so just being really sensitive to that. And so it's not about cutting and closing. We are not cutting and closing to prosperity. We are looking at what are some opportunities to take our facilities and how to manage them better for the future. And that means looking at programming. It also means where there are other resources where we can be a value add to our community, with green space, with housing, with community centers, with business opportunities. And so we wanted to begin to sunlight this issue for our community to say, these are some things that could be a possibility. And the next step is how do we begin to engage around that? So last night's work session was about discussion. There were no decisions made. It was hearing the information. We start with the data because I think it's really important that people understand what is our data. What are our facilities? What are the ages of our facilities? How many students do we have in our facilities? Everybody knows that we have a shortage across the city. And within our district, we have had teacher and staffing shortages that we've been trying to address. People are having fewer children. And so we have been a declining enrollment district for the last 7 or 8 years. And so we have to do some changes if we're going to continue to be robust and rigorous in our approach.
Okay. And so some of those changes may include basically consolidating several facilities and kind of moving students together to these facilities, if I'm understanding that correctly?
Yes. And so we've talked about making sure this movement we're considering is to our strategic plan. Do we ensure that we have equitable outcomes for scholars and families? How are we supporting our families and our staff? And then just also the financial impact, right? We want to continue to contribute to the long-term stability and operational efficiencies of our district. And so that does mean that there are some changes, but I know that it's kind of like the button issue when people hear, oh, we're doing some changes, that automatically means closures. It could mean closures, but it also means it could mean getting more support and reinvesting in some of our facilities or repurposing our facilities.
All right. And
I want that part to be the message. I guess that's, that it's not that we're closing schools, because that's not what the conversation was. It was an aggregate of kind of what are some options.
Right. Just like a general restructuring to basically better optimize the district and to better serve the students and the staff is what I'm kind of understanding. Okay. All right. So then moving forward, speaking to that exactly, how will this better serve students in the district by consolidating schools and consolidating resources?
Couple of different ways: support growth of innovation and adaptive approaches to our facilities. We can look at, and again, I'm going to go back to, we have a land shortage or a housing shortage here in the city of Grand Rapids. And, we could use some of our facilities for affordable housing or parkland or green space preservation for our schools, reinvesting in educational spaces so that teachers have the appropriate support so that they're able to team with other teachers in their professional learning communities. It's very challenging as an educator if you're talking about planning and development of a child and you have only one colleague who may be at your same grade level, or you're teaching a split classroom where you're doing a K-1 split. And so it's a better value add to have another colleague who's teaching at the same grade level, where you can talk about curriculum, you can talk about assessments, and students benefit from that.
All right. So you talked a little bit about the restructuring, basically reducing operation costs. So will that free up additional money to be used for these investments and facilities that you're going to be basically combining into?
Absolutely. So if you think about it, the district has approximately 4 million square feet across all of our schools, and about 1 million of that space across the schools is not being fully utilized. And so just to think about buildings that may be vacant or buildings that are not being fully operationalized, how do we repurpose that space so that we get bigger bang for our buck, and then also reinvest in our staff, reinvest so that we remain competitive, reinvest so that we're offering more programming for our students. So it's a complicated issue in the sense that there are a lot of moving parts, but we want to start the conversation. And one of the things that our board is adamantly consistent with, this is about transparency to our broader community, to say, here's where we are, this is our current reality. How do we look at our current reality and then talk about our desired outcomes for the future? What does that look like? And how do we engage our community in meaningful ways? So with that, we are going to begin this fall in September with some town hall meetings. And the purpose of the town halls are just to, again, reintroduce our strategic plan, because that's where this conversation has come from. And I think it's important that people are understanding that it's about outcomes for scholars, making sure that we have equity and access, and that we are also being transparent around our facilities, being good stewards of our facilities. And then the next phase is to do that. What does that mean? This is our current reality with enrollment. This is our current reality with staffing. And this is what our projected needs are. How do we kind of do that, co-create that narrative together and bring forward some ideas for our board to consider for the future?
So then after these town halls occur, do you have any sort of timeline as far as putting together the full master plan after you get your community feedback?
So yes, we have and I'm saying it's a loose timeline. The goal is this fall, in September and October, to do some town halls to gather feedback from our community, our stakeholders, our scholars, and then to bring that information back to our board for discussion and kind of assessment of what that means. And then they will also continue to work with us around what are the options and create a facilities master plan, hopefully by December of this year. And our goal, once we kind of create what that process will look like related to how many buildings are we talking about, what will be the impact as students matriculate through from elementary to middle to high, then rolling that out as of January and into the spring of 2023 to get again, more support and conversations with our community. Also kind of drilling into those schools and those communities that are most impacted, because I think it's also important and respectful to go back to them and say, hey, this is what it means for your scholar, and this is what it means for your family, and this is how we're going to move this forward.
Okay. And then, so once you have the master plan crafted and everything, if it does include some of these consolidations and closing of buildings and whatnot, is that going to be like a slow process, or will that kind of happen all at once between school years? Or is that too far out in the future to kind of predict?
So I would say we want to be thoughtful. It's, about the process. And so we go slow to go fast. And what I mean by that is we want to be inclusive of our community. That's the marching orders I have heard repeatedly from our community. We've done that with our strategic plan, and it's about how do we ensure that we have engaged voices that we have not always heard from. How have we gone back and said, this is what we heard, did we get it correct? And kind of making sure that people do understand what that process is, and then we can start putting timelines to it. In addition to that, that also requires having conversations with our staff, because we want staff to know we are not cutting our way to prosperity. That is not what this is about. This is about how do we get tighter in our resources so that we can be more competitive and offer more to our staff, because they work really hard and they deserve that. And so we want to make sure that staff understand that they have a pathway in GRPS. There is not a intent around, we're going to be losing staff. I don't anticipate that we will need to lose any staff, but we'll be tighter and people will feel more supported because they have other colleagues to bounce ideas off of and share resources and other information with.
And speaking to staff outside of teachers as well, like janitorial staff and cafeteria staff and stuff like that, I'm assuming that this plan will reduce a lot of costs there and also probably provide better services for students.
It should provide better services. So if you think about a building that maybe has one custodial staff member versus 2 or 3, well, you can get a lot more done and do more detailed cleaning if you have the support of 2 or 3 colleagues. And so that's a benefit to our scholars, that's a benefit to our staff, and it creates a sense of pride and belonging within the school community as a whole. Everybody wants to go to a building that looks clean, is beautiful, and is welcoming. And so I think it really is important. And that's why we make sure that people understand there is a pathway and there is a plan to make sure that we are including our staff in this process. And it's not about closing or reducing staff.
All right. And then the last question I have for you is essentially, since if schools do close, let's say just hypothetically that there's an elementary school closed, that there's a bunch of a community that utilizes that one. How is this going to affect them? Or how far will they have to travel? Kind of, I'm trying to say essentially, like, how is this going to affect like bus routes or like parents dropping their kids off at school, or if like a kid could walk to school before, now he has to take a bus, and
so
like
that's
that.
why this becomes. I think that's a great question. That's why this becomes a complicated kind of puzzle to put together. And so we want to be sensitive to how far is a walking distance for an elementary scholar? What are the other options within the neighborhood or in the footprint of that area, and what the impact is? And as you know, with a district our size, nothing sits in isolation. It's like one thing impacts another. It's like a domino. And so we want to be sensitive. And that's why we're saying, hey, we're going to start these conversations. It's going to be challenging and tough, but we need you to stay engaged with us and we'll figure it out together. And all of those different moving parts will have to come along as we are building the plane. And this sounds kind of like a crazy kind of example, building the plane while you are flying it, which sounds kind of scary, but we want to make sure that people understand that we are going to continue to invite them to stay engaged in this process and continue to come back and say, this is what the plan is, this is what the impact is. And so I think it's really important that people know this is how it'll impact scholars, this is how it'll impact the staff, this is how it'll impact the community. And here are the opportunities for scholars, staff, and community.
All right. And then I guess I just thought of one other question too. I don't know if you have a lot of public like park facilities at your schools and stuff that people can use outside of school hours. is there any kind of idea for those to continue to stay open for the community if a school or a facility does close that has a playground attached to it?
And that's one of the things that we've talked about. We want to be a value add to our community to make sure that it doesn't take away, because let's be honest, kids need to be in parks. Kids need to have opportunities to play. And so it's investing in not only our educational spaces, but our outside environment to make sure, again, we are a value add to the community. So the community is able to use that green space or that park to play and feel safe.
All right. I only asked that because I live like right next door to an elementary school in Wyoming. And so every single day I take my daughters there to play, and I don't know what I would do otherwise without it.
And it's important, right? I mean, kids don't play enough. And so, yes, we want to be great community stewards. We want to be great community neighbors. And the goal is to, looking at our space, what are the opportunities? How do we recreate space so that families can walk parks, or they can take their kids to the park, or even, dog parks. That's important too. So all of those things. So those are things that we're weighing out as we go through this process.
All right. That's all the questions I have. If there's anything else you'd like to add, feel free.
No, I just appreciate the time. And, certainly, well, I guess I said no, and then I start talking.
You're fine.
So I would say, for our community to look for on our website when those town halls will start to take place, and we will be across the city. We're planning on 9 at this time. If we need to expand to more, we are certainly willing to do that as well. But we want to make sure that we have different parts of the city so that nobody has to travel too far, and we provide opportunities for people to hear what the plan is and to weigh in on it.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to talk with me. And I'm sure I'll be touching base with you again in the fall after you have some of these town halls to kind of see what the community's
I appreciate it. Thank you, Stephen.
Yep. Have a good one.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
You're watching 13 on Your Side.